Dave Colson is president of the Organic Farmers Association. The Organic Farmers Association exists to provide a strong and united national voice for domestic certified organic producers in the USA. They do things like develop and advocate for policy and support collaboration between local, state, and national farmers and organizations. Dave has been an organic farmer for 40 years and runs a certified organic farm in Durham, Maine with his wife. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great. So, as I said, you have been farming for 40 years and doing literally anything for 40 years is an incredible accomplishment. But it also makes you certainly one of, if not the most eminently qualified people to talk about organic farming. So I'd like to start with your background. How did you become a farmer, and how did you get into organic farming as well?
Well, first, thanks for having me and having the conversation today. In terms of getting started, I did not come from an agricultural background. My dad worked in corporate business, but both my parents were big outdoors people. They loved hiking and camping, canoeing, sailing, outdoor activities. So my sister and I were raised with that as our background. I got interested in agriculture when I was in high school, worked on a fairly large dairy farm in central New York for a year before I went into ag school in the 70s in one of the New York State SUNY schools, but pretty quickly realized that the style of agriculture that the conventional schools were talking about at the time was not really what I was interested in doing. And I had been reading books from the Rodale Institute and others about this other notion of organic farming. So I ended up going to a couple different other schools. Goddard College in Vermont in the 70s was doing some work in social ecology and alternative growing types of things. And from that, I ended up on the West Coast and worked on some farms out there, since that was a little bit more advanced on the West Coast at that time. And then my parents and I ended up moving to Maine in '81, and we bought our property here in Durham in 1982 with the express desire to market locally and grow and produce organic fruits, vegetables, and flowers and herbs. And at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of farms that were certified. Well, there really was not much of a certification program at that time.
At the time, was the USDA involved at all in organic farming, or was it kind of a more informal process for certification?
Yeah, no, the USDA was not really involved. We were lucky here in Maine that we did have a couple of USDA extension agents, local county agents, who were interested and helped get the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association going. And through that, we came up with some standards through MAFCA, as the organization was called. And in the late 70s, the first couple of farms were certified as organic, but the program really picked up when Dr. Eric Seidman started working for MAFCA around 1985 or so, and really became, MAFCA is not a government organization, but in a sense, he became the first organic extension agent in the country. And so pretty quickly, we went from about 14 farms that were certified, and that has just grown exponentially since then. So the USDA didn't really get involved too much directly until about 2002. 1990 was the start of the original law called the Organic Food Production Act, or OFPA. And in 1990, that law was passed as part of the Farm Bill that year. Senator Leahy in Vermont and others were instrumental in helping getting that through. And that allowed the USDA to set up an advisory board that was called the National Organic Standards Board that worked to get agreement across different certifiers all across the country at the time and come up with a national rule. And that went into effect in about 2002.
I see. So what you're describing is really, I guess a gradual but also major changes in the regulation framework around organic farming. I wanted to talk about this later, but I guess this would be a great place to talk about it. How do you see the current state of USDA regulations? They're obviously fairly strict, right? And there could be some arguments about like what perhaps as an organic farmer, you feel like some of these regulations are very good. Perhaps you disagree with some of them. Perhaps you feel like they're all quite good. And obviously it still likely has some future evolution, right? It's changed. The regulatory framework has changed to a certain point, and in the future it may continue to change. How do you see what the USDA does right now in terms of organic farming?
Yeah, good question. The USDA and the National Organic Program, or NOP as it's called, that runs the organic program, is like any government regulatory agency. It moves at a glacial pace. There's a lot of regulation, not just around what's allowed in organic, but how they have to do their business. In order to change something, it needs to be vetted through this National Organic Standards Board, which still exists. There has to be public comment period. Has to be reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget that sits in the White House. They look at the economics involved. So, for instance, organic eggs originally needed to come from birds that had access to the outdoors. Like they might be in a barn for some period of time, but they needed to be able to go out and display their natural behaviors of pecking at the ground, of digging up the ground, of and being in the sunlight. And there were some certifiers that allowed what we call porches, which is basically a little opening in the barn that lets a few birds, if they want to even go out, into a screened-in porch with a roof over it, and that's their access to the outdoors. Now, a lot of us don't agree with that interpretation of the rule, but the National Organic Program continues to allow that. So that's one place where we have very strong disagreement. There are some others, such as confinement operations, which you could argue that some of these large chicken barns are, or some mega dairies that are located mostly in the West that really don't allow access to the outdoors as far as we can see. They're in, again, very large barns, and anyone that's managed dairy animals knows, most people know dairy cows are milked twice a day. And in order to get the recommended 30% of their feed from pasture during the growing season, those cows have to go outside and be on that pasture. Now, if you have 6 or 8 or 9,000 cows in a barn, you pretty quickly use up whatever pasture is right around the barn. And then if they have to walk 2 or 3 miles to get to another piece of pasture, how do they do that, eat enough to supply 30% of their intake, and then get back to the barn in order to be milked? It's just, it doesn't make sense. And then a third example would be the allowed certification of hydroponic operations. Now, hydroponics or aquaponics, which utilizes fish, recycling fish waste, or aeroponics are conventionally done. Hydroponics can be done using synthetic fertilizers. That's not allowed under the organic rule. But these companies
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you saying that on organic certified hydroponic farms, which were just recently certified, right? They just recently said, okay, it's allowed to do hydroponics now. They can use synthetic fertilizers that are not allowed?
No, they cannot.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So on conventional hydroponics, that's how they do it. But what you need in a hydroponic system is nutrients that'll dissolve in water, because obviously either the roots in the case of a tomato, or, well, the roots as well in the case of lettuce or basil, but the lettuce and basil plants are usually in some kind of a raft, like made of styrofoam, that's floating in a tank of water containing nutrients. Now, you need something that will readily dissolve in that water to be available to the plants. So what the companies are doing is taking something like a soy, ground up soybean that has a lot of protein and therefore nitrogen in it, and they're hydrosylating it so that those proteins or that nitrogen is easily taken up by the plant. Now, in the original 1990 law that started this whole process, there wasn't anything that specifically said that plants had to grow in soil. Personally, I've been setting up what we call hoop houses, which is a plastic covered structure like a greenhouse. They're unheated. We grow plants in the ground directly, but they're covered so that we can extend our season.
There was probably a point also where that was taken for granted, where, for example, you wouldn't put in the regulations, okay, plants need to use, you have to water them with water, because of course they're watered with water. What else would you do? Of course they'd be grown in soil. What else would you do?
Exactly. It was pretty much accepted. And the reason I bring up my greenhouses is I put those in 92. We were one of the earlier adapters. So in 1990, when the rule was written, it wasn't like there were tons of hydroponic or even greenhouse grown crops at that period of time. So yes, you're right. It was just accepted that we were talking about farms growing plants in the soil or animals that were out on the ground. And the rules, not only the original law, but the regulations are written such that it talks a lot about recycling of nutrients and how you manage your land, and that you don't cause erosion, and that you rotate your crops, that you grow what we call cover crops to cover the ground during the times of year when you aren't growing crops. So it's very much a soil-based regulation or process. And so Organic Farmers Association is not saying that we don't think there should be hydroponic production. Folks are completely welcome to grow things in any manner that they want to. We're just saying that shouldn't be allowed under organic certification. So those are three examples kind of where we disagree.
And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples, because, once again, the rules are stringent and extensive, right? It's interesting that there's these kind of two types of regulations you might disagree with. Some you think are not restrictive enough, especially in terms of animal welfare, right? Which is, you know, I think perhaps if you've never read about it, you might be inclined to think that organic would mean, you know, humanely raised animals, and perhaps you would feel that it would be good if you know the organic brand could guarantee that, right? You buy some organic meat and you know that animal is treated well throughout its life, and in fact, the regulations don't at all guarantee that. And then on the other hand, perhaps regulations that are not restrictive enough because they don't really vibe with the ethos of organic farming, which is a lot about, you know, the health of the plants, of the soil, of the farm, the local environment, the farmers, the consumers, sort of the whole ecosystem of the farm being healthy, which again is not always guaranteed by the structure of the regulations themselves. One of the things that you had just mentioned was using so using this styrofoam, for example, in some operations that are organic, and this is also one of the critiques of organic farms, that because of these regulations, there are some things that farmers are sort of forced to do because they can't use certain kinds of herbicides or pesticides, like, for example, using a lot of plastic to cover up the ground because, you know, for weed or pest control or whatever. And perhaps this plastic also it can't be synthetic, so it's not biodegradable. So in some limited ways, organic farming can perhaps be worse for the environment. What do you make of this critique?
So use of plastics is not limited to organic production. It's used in conventional production as well. And the biodegradable plastics are not allowed in organic. A biodegradable plastic still contains at least 25% synthetic plastic. So until there's a fully biodegradable plastic, so far we've been able to hold off that use in organic. But disposal is part of what is the issue. The plastic is pretty inert when it's in the fields, but at the end of under organic certification, you're required to pull that plastic up at the end of the year so that it doesn't end up breaking down and going into the soil. Mm-hmm. But once you pull that up, now it's got to be disposed of. And what's a good way to do that? It can't be recycled because it's so dirty. The edges have to be buried, so it could be recycled, but no plastic recycler is going to want to take it when they can get clean plastic to recycle. So yes, that is a big issue. There are ways around it, but it's not unique to organic agriculture, since conventional agriculture, and here we're mostly talking about fruits or primarily vegetables that are grown in plastic. You don't grow grain, let's say, on plastic culture. And the other part of the production of high-end vegetables, whether it's conventional or organic, is we need to consider the amount of labor that goes into producing those things. And agriculture for the last 75 years has worked really hard to reduce the amount of labor that goes into agriculture, because that's one of the largest costs.
I see. This makes sense. I'd like to talk for a bit about the industry itself. So we have, let's say broadly, these two different kind of farming: conventional farming and organic farming, right? Of course, there's, that's an easy divide to make. Perhaps it's not so simple, but organic farms, it seems like, tend to be more local, so they sell to local consumers, restaurants, stores, etc., farmers markets. They tend to be smaller, just smaller farms. And it seems to me, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that quite a bit of organic farming, maybe farmers get into it because they like, once again, kind of the ethos, the philosophy of organic farming, right? Like you could make any kind of a farm, but you want to be more natural and healthy, in all ways. And so you make this organic farm. But because of the large price premium on organics, and because of the, let's say, the flexibility of the rules, or the different ways you might be able to get around organic rules so that you can make this farm, you can make it very profitable, you don't really care too much about health, but you can charge a premium for your products. How much of this do you see in the organic industry, especially as it's grown so much? Do most of the organic farmers that or that are in the industry still sort of carry around the philosophy of organic farming, or has it become quite commercialized?
That's a really good question. Well, I would push back a little bit on the notion that organic farms, because of their nature, need to be smaller. It does scale well. There are some large organic grain farms, and some large, well-run organic produce farms as well. In the dairy sector, it makes more sense in a lot of ways that the milk is produced near where the consumer is going to be, which is pretty much how things were done for until 10 or 15 years ago. Now, not in conventional and organic, we have these massive mega dairies of 10 to 14,000 cows in one operation, and processors that can use the high intensity pasteurization in order to be able to ship that all over the place. So that isn't the question that you're asking necessarily, but I think that farms that do sell to their local markets, what we used to call it was either know your farmer, know your food, or food with a face. When you buy that directly from someone, you have the ability to speak with them directly, or you have the ability to go out and see their farm and see how their animals are treated, or see how their plants look, and so on. And I think there's a reassurance to that. I think the bigger piece of organic are for those shoppers that don't have that ability to meet their farmer and look at how things are done. Those folks are looking for a label that they can feel confident in, that they can go to a supermarket and purchase something and know that the values that they are looking for and what they want to buy are held by the farmer who's producing that food. My concern is that the integrity of that label is being compromised little bit by little bit, and that animals are not being let outside, that the product that my wife asked me the other day, she bought a box of spring mix, and she said, "Gee, is this hydroponic?" And I said, "Probably is." And she said, "Well, it doesn't say that on the label." And I said, "Well, no, that's why they want to just call it organic. They don't want to point out that it's grown in a water bath." So my concern is that the consumer who is looking for a purchase that aligns with their values will lose faith in the organic label, and then where do we go at that point?
That's a very good answer. My last question is, well, I suppose it's really about the future directions of organic farming in America. And so to give you some context, right? This interview and what I do on my channel is for debate students, right? There's some tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 debate students that will be discussing this topic next month. And the resolution that they have to discuss, and they need to be prepared to debate both sides, is essentially, would it be better to have more organic farming in America? Would that on net be a better thing to have more of it, or a worse thing to have more of it? So pretty straightforward. The big thing I've been struggling with is that it seems extremely one-sided, perhaps more than any other of the like 50 or so topics that I've seen, because it's like on balance, would it be better if you went to the gym or not? Okay, yeah, there's some bad things about the gym potentially, but there's 100 good things about the gym. Why not? So it strikes me as something like that. And also, as of 2016 was the last number I could find, only 1% of American farmland is organic, which is not much. So if we doubled it, that would be 2%, which is still not much, right? So I suppose my question is, how do you see organic agriculture growing in the future? And this might be a tough one, but if possible, could you see any bad side to it?
Oh, interesting. Yes, I think it's important that organic grows, and I would love it see it become the dominant form of agriculture personally. And there are some places that are trying that in the world. Sikkim in India is one of the states in India, and they have a program. The food is only grown organically in Sikkim. It's the first state in India that's done that. I believe it's Denmark that's going the same way. One of the unique things there, I believe in Denmark, is that the government pays for the certification of the organic farms. In the US, that's on the farmer to pay for that certification. There is a cost share within the USDA, but still, the onus is on the farmer. So I think there's a lot of things that the US could do to encourage organic agriculture. Research is certainly one. We have some massive agriculture research monies that are out there, but it doesn't even meet that 1 or 2% of the farms that are actually, or land that's in agriculture. So I think we need to match that at least to the amount of land that is growing organically. So yeah, I see it as a growing trajectory. I think the other thing that I'm seeing is this huge interest in a younger generation that wants to farm. When I started, as I mentioned, we had 14 farms in the state of Maine that were certified organic. We're over 500 now.
Wow.
And a number of those are bigger farms, but a lot of them are really smaller operations that are really direct to consumer oriented. And an interesting thing during the beginning of this last couple of years of this pandemic was disruption of supply chains and things in the grocery store, particularly in a state like Maine that's kind of the end of the pipeline. And between that and people being worried about being in contact with too many people, the surge in interest in purchasing from local farms went up dramatically. So it just seems to me that based on a lot of things that we're concerned about, supply chains, climate change, many aspects, that organic farming offers alternatives to the system that we have now.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very difficult to find arguments against it. So I feel very bad for my students who will have to try to debate against organic farming. It'll be tough for them. All right, that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for this meeting. I think this will mean a lot to quite a few students.